Hey IT friends, how's it going? So I had recorded this super wholesome video today, and then as I was getting ready to finish editing it, I was like, no one wants to hear that shit from me. So I'll save it for another day, and instead you can have Angry Dean, which I find to be far more entertaining. I want to talk about a Reddit post the other day from an employee's perspective, and the title of the post was Enter in All Your Time or Else You're Fired. And I want to talk a little bit, not necessarily about, and I've beaten to death the idea of accountability and entering time. So I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk more about how to identify a boss that doesn't really understand what they're trying to hold you accountable to, and how to interpret that situation in a way that might allow both you and your boss to have that opportunity to sort of unfuck the situation. Because I think just being an angsty employee, stomping your feet and saying, this is unfair, that doesn't help anybody. And to be clear, if you're that employee at any business, that's a career limiting problem on you, and you need to grow the fuck up. And on the flip side, if you're a boss that thinks the stick is the only way to motivate people, especially in a service business where, we're supposed to, like, as our product, be treating people properly, yeah, you probably shouldn't be in charge of anything. So, there you go, everybody. If you don't want to watch the rest of the video, if you only use a stick as a boss, it's time to stop being a boss. And if you're an employee that is insistent that you absolutely will not submit to being managed or any form of accountability, it's time to go move into the woods and be a hermit because you don't belong as part of society. For anyone who's left, let's talk a little more about that. As I mentioned in previous videos, my wife's a math teacher. She's very smart. And she mostly teaches elementary math and like middle school math and takes her job super, super seriously. She's excellent, very, very good at it. I'm terrible at math. What I found interesting was as she had a handful of students that she took forward where she tutored them as they continued to go through school into higher grades, especially high school, that it went from my wife knows all the math concepts and fundamentally understands how it works and how to learn it and therefore how to teach it, to my wife could really only parrot what was in the textbook when it came to some of the high school level math. The disconnect there was, well, she certainly understood the words and like the basic concepts of teaching math. Like trig was a great example. Trigonometry, triangles for everybody here who's not into math. Triangle math. She just couldn't really teach triangle math. And I ended up having to stand off camera a lot and assist because I realized that just because she could read the textbook and parrot the material and knew how to teach the material didn't mean she actually understood what she was teaching innately. And that diminished the delivery. And I use this example because I think it's a pretty non-confrontational example for everybody. That's a lot of employees and that's a lot of managers in every industry ever. They're put into positions where they can go through the motions, but they don't really understand what they're doing, the why, how it works. In my trigonometry example, my wife literally cannot visualize the triangles in her head, rotate them around to apply the math, which you kind of need to be able to do in trigonometry and geometry to be successful at it, especially to teach it. Just her brain doesn't work that way. So, and no one ever taught her that. So she's struggled to educate other people on it effectively. So now imagine you're in that position in the business context, and the relationship is not teacher and student. It's that much more muddled relationship that most of us have in a small business of manager and employee, but it's also kind of peer and friend, maybe. It's way more complicated. And we're all probably at a similar age, yada, yada. Well, I'm put in a position now where I need to hold you accountable for something that I certainly understand well enough to parrot, but I don't really understand. And you're pushing back or challenging me on it. I'm probably going to not like the way that feels as a manager. And there's a very good chance that I am going to start resorting to the stick methodology of basically shut up and just do it. And it's a weird and common and kind of dangerous trap that a lot of us fall into. And you may have fallen into it. You don't even know you've fallen into it. And that would be a whole other separate video. But the point is, that's how you can end up having a manager that is telling you things like you need to enter time, comma space, or you're fired, which no part of that sentence is empirically incorrect. You should be entering time. You should be a 100% accountable employee. And if you're not being 100% accountable, you probably shouldn't work here. Like, nothing in that sentence is inaccurate, but yet that sentence just comes off as just such a giant middle finger. And before anyone here asks, I was that manager once, and I was lucky enough that I had an employee named Nick one day who pulled me aside. Nick was our like T4, who was too important to actually fire, which gave him some freedom. And Nick pulled me aside once, and he was like, "Hey, you're being an asshole, and you need to stop. No one's ever going to listen to you if you talk that way to them." And I don't know what it was. It was that particular day where my brain was at. He just caught me at the right moment where I was like, "Oh, no shit, you're right." And that was my wake up moment. But a lot of us haven't had a Nick that gives us that moment as managers to recognize that the stick methodology, especially if we don't really understand how it works, is not a productive path to go down. On the flip side of this, we have employees that don't really understand why they're being asked to do something. And I think it's easy to say, well, that's the employer's fault. The employer should be educating the employee on the why. And you're right, they should. But I've met a lot of employees over my years who just don't give a shit, and they plug their ears up and they don't care about the why. They don't want to be told. The material's available to them and they don't care. And they fundamentally don't want to learn why they're doing what they're doing at their job. They just want to pick up a box and put it down. And this is going to sound a little bit unfair, but in a service-based business, those people can't be employees. And if that is you as an employee, I got news for you. Like, first of all, that's dumb. You're being dumb, and you should stop that because you're benefiting nobody. I don't care what job you're in and at what level. You should always try to learn a little bit about why, because it makes you smarter and helps you better understand the world, and that's how you move up in life. And even if you are completely happy with being the person who picks up boxes and puts them back down, and never wants to be anything more than the person who picks up boxes and puts them down, I would suggest you still learn everything there is to learn about the ins and outs of putting down boxes, because that'll build job security if nothing else. But I digress. My point is here that employees that are dead set from the start on being ungovernable, that's not going to change. That's a culture fit issue. We've talked about that in previous videos. Those folks need to be exited out of your organization just in general, because in a service-based business, we just can't have people like that being in front of clients. It's not as problematic in a non-client facing service business, but where you're client facing, it really is. So, all right, so we've exited the people who refuse to be governable. The person who posted this on Reddit, I don't think was refusing to be governable. I think they were just aggravated because it didn't make sense to them. So let's talk a little bit more about those people that fall in the middle there, which I think is most of our employees. They don't want to be bullied, but maybe they don't fully understand why you give a shit so much. So these employees that fall in this middle area, like I think the original poster did, these are folks that are willing to do it. They're willing to be accountable. They don't understand why they need to be accountable. And I don't mean they don't understand the concept of accountability. Of course they do. They're not assholes. Like, they get it. Like, it's a job. This is a social contract. Like, of course I have to be accountable for my actions and what they do. So it's not a question of why should I be accountable? They're on board with that. It's they don't understand how what you're asking them to do makes them accountable. And so then it just feels like random extra work. And a good example of this, and we all have, everybody here can visualize that person. You have all had at some point or worked with at some point that sort of medium, higher level person, probably had a title like an engineer, who would get the job done and always ended up doing right by the business and the clients, but was extremely resistant to note taking or documentation or timeliness or just some accountability aspect in their job. And you're sitting there, you're like, why won't what's wrong with this person? Why won't they do the thing? They're great otherwise. Well, this is the type of person I'm talking about at an extreme scale. In most cases, the fact that they get the job done and they do right by your company and the client, that's them acknowledging the fact that they're willing to be accountable. They understand the dynamic. The reason that they're not doing the other things, first of all, it's a habit and it takes practice. But secondly, in just mental wise, is probably because you never really did a great job communicating to them exactly why that accountability was an important way to be accountable. And employees, they're not dumb. So I find a lot of places tend to give very glazed over answers, assuming that the staff don't know or don't want to know or don't want to care. And once again, if you have staff members that just don't care to learn more, they probably shouldn't be on your staff. I mean, maybe someday when you're massive and you only have roles where people pick up and put down boxes, you can keep those folks, but y'all aren't that massive. So you want people that, care a little. Well, this goes back to what I just said a minute ago. It's because their managers don't really understand what they're managing. And it's this bizarro chicken and an egg situation. And if your MSP is the size, whereas the owner, you're the primary manager, I got bad news for you. It's because you don't really understand what you're managing. And that's okay. Like, literally accepting that I don't actually really understand how this works. I kind of do. I know it's important. I've read a little bit about it. I can parrot it, but I don't really know how it works. That's a good thing to identify, because now you have a problem you can go and solve. You can learn more about it and become educated. And you'll see this in other cases with this general concept that, like, if you can't break, right, how many of us have done this with a client? If you can't break down a technical issue into something that you can explain at like roughly a fifth grade level, or they explain it like I'm five. I know 5-year-olds aren't fifth grade. Then it means you don't really understand it. That works here too. So I think it's just important to understand that there's 50-50 in this. The employee needs to be willing to be accountable. They need to put in the effort to learn enough about why they're being accountable to be effective. But you, as the manager, also need to understand why they're accountable and how it works. And specifically in the case of MSPs, don't even get me started on how many service managers or middle managers or smaller MSPs owners fundamentally do not actually understand how their employees, in this example, entering time, what that does. You'll get a very astroturfy answer of something like, well, time is my inventory, and that's how I bill, and that's how I track profitability. So I need you to enter time. Sure. How? And I guarantee you I could get pretty much any of you on a call with me. And my guess would be more than half of you, I could keep asking that question and you would reach a level where you were not able to explain it anymore. And that's fine. I don't expect you to know everything, but your staff can kind of pick up on the fact that you don't know it and you're telling them to do it. And then if you're bringing out a stick instead of a carrot to kind of beat them for it, well, as I said, staff aren't stupid. And so you're hitting me to go roll the boulder up the hill that you don't even know how to roll that boulder up a hill. And I know that. And you're yelling at me and telling me I'm doing a bad job rolling the boulder up a hill. But not only have you never rolled it yourself, you don't even know how to show me how to roll it. Right? It's that coaching paradox, those who can't do coach. And so that's really all I'm saying here. So getting back to this original Reddit post. So sort of the part that kind of ties this all back together. So this employee was told that they need to record all the time in real time. And They're saying they objectively don't have time to do that because based on going on site and their commitments, they're often staying late anyways. How can I get it done? And their boss said that they do, real time tracking, and that their boss needs to be able to look at it at any time and see the most up to date information. And this employee is basically saying, "What the fuck? Like that doesn't make any sense to me, and you're getting mad at me, and you're not putting me in a condition where I can be successful." And there's the problem. And so once you understand that, in this case, this boss doesn't really know how it works in actuality, well, you go learn how it works. And now you realize that there's a million solutions to alleviate all the frustration points here. And I can tell you, as somebody who knows how it works, just from reading this post, this person who's going on site, first of all, was not properly trained to be in front of clients, because if we don't understand how our time entry and ticketing software works fundamentally, then we don't understand our MSP's policies and processes well. We have no business being in front of clients. That's your highest opportunity cost engagement. So already I know, just based on that statement, that the employee isn't ready to be on site, and the boss doesn't really understand what product the MSP is delivering. And pull that back another layer. Well, this is scheduling and resourcing. If I'm setting my employee up to be successful in this situation where I have a time entry software, and let's say it's only available on a laptop, well, that means that that employee needs to have internet and a place to plug in a laptop to enter notes, and ideally a desk and a chair. So whether that's at the client side or in their car or whatever, they need to have all the resources to be able to do that. They need to have enough time to be able to do that. They can't be rushed to do that if I'm also expecting them to do that in a way that has a high quality level. And also, well, it kind of can't fully be in real time. It's going to be close to real time because they're on site. And if I'm directly talking to a client, I'm not going to mid sentence stop and be like, "I'm sorry, I need to enter my notes in real time." That's terrible service. We want something that's adjacent to real time for the on site person. And there's just so many solutions to eliminate this pain while still achieving the goal. But that's not happening. And instead, what's happening is a boss is saying, "Do it or you're fired." An employee who is not stupid is saying, "This doesn't pass the sniff test, but I don't know why." That whole situation is a great example of two parties who quite literally do not understand what they are doing. The post ends with something that I also once made the mistake of doing myself as a manager. The post ends with the OP basically saying that his boss said, "Well, other MSPs would fire you if you didn't enter your time." And it's a problematic statement for a couple of reasons. So it's not inaccurate. And that, once again, goes back to sort of the challenge with this entire situation. From a superficial AstroTurf level, that is a fair and accurate statement. That most other MSPs would not tolerate an employee refusing to enter time and probably would terminate them. Like, that is accurate. But, and that's where the lack of real understanding happens. And I did this as well. When I was first getting into teaching my team years ago how to do real-time time entry, I had been told it was important, but I didn't really understand why yet. And I would frequently say things like that because I would hear other people say things like that without really understanding all of the nuances and the in-betweens. That's problem one. Problem two, it's an inherently negative, threatening statement. And if you're at a point where you are needing to use that level of negativity and threatening language to try and motivate an existing employee, you've probably already failed. And three, our job as managers, just in general, should be to always be building our employees up into the best possible, most marketable versions of themselves in the space. And then our commitment is that we're going to every day convince them to show up to work for us, but we're fully preparing them to be ready to leave at any minute to be successful somewhere else. And if you are that kind of manager, most people like working for someone like that because it doesn't feel disingenuous and ham-fisted like the boss does in this post. So telling people, and I did this, I had to learn this lesson the hard way, telling people no one else would want you because you don't do X, Y, and Z, whether or not that is technically true, is not a beneficial statement and doesn't help the employee. And a way better way of saying it is, you you would have increased prospects and success in your career if you learn to adopt this behavior. It's a common expectation. Let me help teach you how this works, because not only will that help you here, but if you do go somewhere else, another employer is likely to say, I love that you can do that thing. Please, here is all the money. And right, it's the same message, but it's a much less negative confrontational statement. In all of these cases, I just think that really sums up, this is a manager who's scared in a certain sense. They don't, it's fear, that's fear talking. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't really know how to hold their staff accountable. They don't really understand why. They just know that they should. And so they are just hitting their staff with a stick. They're not actually making the problem any better. And the staff member is, obviously not particularly happy with it and has gone to Reddit. And what's unfortunate about that is these always devolve into, 50 different people who don't know their fucking ass from their elbow posting, oh, you shouldn't have to enter time. You don't need to be accountable. And all the people who post that, shut the fuck up. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And no offense, but that's not helpful at all in these posts. Sorry. It's a personal teen rant. But anyways, if you're a manager and there's something right now that you're in charge of that you have to hold someone else accountable for, and all you really know is you're supposed to hold them accountable for it, and here is sort of the textbook on what to do, but you don't actually understand how any of it works. First of all, that's okay. Identify that. And then secondly, let's start changing that. Let's start working on learning exactly how that thing works. And if you genuinely don't want to learn how it works as a manager, you need to go have that removed from your scope, because you just can't be in charge of mentoring, growing, training, and holding folks accountable for things that you yourself do not understand how they actually function. Your employees will see through that. It will hurt you. It will damage you. You are better off taking that off your plate entirely if you are not willing to put in the work to learn how to do it. And on the employee side, you got to be willing to understand that you work in a business and there is going to be a certain, expectation of accountability, whether you like it or not. And some of that is on you to find a way to do it. And speaking for managers everywhere, if that means you got to take notes in your van or sit in a chair at the client's site, you're not entirely comfortable with that, time to be an adult, because, it's an adult job. I don't care if you're entirely comfortable with that. You got to do it. But, and here's your get out of jail free card employees, if you don't really understand why, you should ask. And don't be afraid to be a little bit pushy. Not confrontational, just pushy. Like, I really want to learn how this works. Teach me. We're not doing anyone any good in this space or any other space by not teaching our employees fundamentally how the business functions. Not all the employees you have are going to care or want to learn every detail, but the smarter you can make your entire team, the better you'll make your entire team. I was at an IT Nation years ago, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody got up and posted, and they talked about this idea that the basic financials of the company were public information to all employees. And they had a recurring meeting that they would do on a quarterly basis where they would go over at a very basic level the basic financial concepts of the company, like profit, margin, gross profit, just stuff like that. And they would just make that information available to anyone in the company who wanted to learn a tiny bit about how it all worked. And I think that's kind of the right spirit here. Don't hoard that information from your employees, and employees, don't think that you're not entitled to learn a little bit about sort of, how the juice is squeezed, because it's really important if you're trying to assess, whether the juice is worth the squeeze. Kind of good to know how it's being squeezed so you can have a little bit more context there. Have a great Thursday, everybody. And, maybe don't just immediately go to the you're fired if you don't meet this accountability metric. There's a couple steps in between there, folks.